It is okay. So thanks everyone for joining us this evening. If you haven't been to a housing roundtable before, welcome. We do these quarterly. We focus typically on three specific topics. I help moderate the conversation, but Mike is really the knowledge of all things housing. So we'll go through our topic list. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question, or you can post it into the chat area. I'll moderate the chat area, Mike, so you don't have to look in both places. Three topics for this evening are going to be best practices for leases. We know that this is the time of year that a lot of facilities are working on their leases for the upcoming school year, even though it feels like we just got started with the fall semester. We're going to talk about practices for filling facilities and making sure that we don't have empty beds. And then lastly, it is starting to get cold in certain places around the country. So we are going to discuss a little bit about winter weather preparation for that time. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will be checking out the chat area as we go.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to our third, I think, quarterly Housing Roundtable. Some of you guys I know, some of you guys are from chapters where we are a presence, and some of you are new. So I will also point out that I had a parent-teacher conference, a Zoom conference today earlier, and the internet was a little unstable. So if I freeze or something, it generally comes back, but so bear with me. Again, a little bit about me. I'm the executive director for the Triangle Building and Housing Corporation. We are the entity of the fraternity. We're a separate legal entity, a 501c7, but we are underneath the general umbrella of Triangle Fraternity, and we operate out of three buckets. We operate out of the finance bucket, which is like loans, mortgages, lending money, things to help chapters do the things they need to do. Certainly for life safety, things like that. Consulting, where we offer advice. Myself as well as my board members can offer consulting on various topics. This would be an exhibit of that service, the consulting. And then property. And the property bucket, we have both ownership and management. We own several houses, and then we also manage houses that we don't own, that are owned by alumni. I always like to say that our goal is to get you out of the landlord business and back into the fraternity business. In other words, mentoring, helping alumni mentor, take the limited resources of time and effort they have and point it toward the undergraduates to help them be better. We are the steel superstructure within which the chapter can constantly rebuild themselves. Anyway, so let me start with the first one on the list Carrie has for me, filling chapter facilities. So that's kind of a two-part question. There's the alumni or the ownership sort of perspective on filling chapter facilities. I'll start with that and then move to the sort of the undergrad perspective of filling chapter facilities. So Carrie, if I forget to do the undergrad, please direct me back that way. As owners or alumni trying to fill chapter facilities, a lot of it is going to be based on your tolerance level for debt or your tolerance level for margin on profit or margin on break even. Meaning one of the best ways I found for owners to fill chapter facilities is to put out incentives. At the undergraduate level, you can use both what I call sticks and carrots. At the ownership level, it's really more about carrots than sticks. You do have a stick along the lines of something called empty bed fees that end up getting spread across the whole chapter that can motivate, but it's really a very negative policy. It's sometimes you don't really have a choice. I know in our business, we tend to give several years of lead up to something like that. We'll kind of let you try to build up and try to fill the house over 1, 2, 3 years before we start trying to say, okay, we've worked together, we've had all this time to fill the house, now we need to start having the house not lose money. So in terms of incentives, one of the best incentives I've ever come across in the fraternity world is goes back to recruitment. So really the best people that we want to try to get in our houses are new people. In other words, if you grow the chapter, one of our formulas for chapter housing is 3 members for every bed. If you have 3 members in your chapter for every bed, then chances are you'll never have an empty bed. You're going to have enough supply of what I call butts for beds that you'll never really struggle with filling them. 2 is okay. It's marginal. Anything under 2, and you're really rolling the dice on having putting yourself in a financial position that can be make it really tough to manage a property and meet all your revenue or meet all your expenses for that property. So the incentive would be you basically have a system where members, as they recruit, so say John goes out and recruits, talks to and recruits a guy named Bob. It's a little bit like a sales leaderboard. So you have to track this stuff. And the fraternity offers a fantastic system called Chapter Builder that makes this, I mean, just absolutely simple as can be. It's all basically set up for you. It's all, and if anybody wants to know more about Chapter Builder, I see Tom's on the call. He can certainly talk about it, and he knows a lot more about it than I do. Basically, say John goes out and recruits Bob, and then he comes back to the chapter and says, "Okay, I'm recruiting a guy named Bob, and so put him up on the board and put me as his contact or his rep or his salesperson, whatever you want to call it." And then he recruits Bob into the organization. Bob then goes all the way through, and you would offer an incentive that says, and this is really just if you're having trouble filling the house. You don't do this unless you're short on numbers and you're struggling with membership and struggling to fill the house. And again, like I said earlier, you have to have some tolerance for cutting revenue and dealing with a little bit of lost revenue. But in the long run, you'll far exceed that number if you can tolerate it. So basically, you say for every new member that a current member recruits, and then that person is pledged, completes pledgeship, is initiated, and signs a lease to live in the house. And remember, if you own a chapter facility or you are in a chapter facility with beds you need to fill, you should never recruit anybody without being completely upfront and honest about, we are a fraternity that includes housing. That is part of our culture. That is part of who we are. There's no point in not being upfront about that, because you're going to spend a whole bunch of time recruiting somebody that in the end is going to quit because you didn't tell them about housing. You didn't tell them about the cost. But what you can do is, if John has recruited Bob and brought him all the way through with and he signs a lease for that first live-in year, the day that Bob moves into the chapter, John gets a check for 25% of his housing cost. And if you think about it, like, holy cow, 25%. Yeah, but that's a new guy in a bed that wasn't filled paying 100%. So if John goes out and recruits 4 brand new people to the organization, he gets to live for free, but he filled 4 beds that you didn't have filled before. And if you just spread that across the chapter, so everybody that goes out and recruits somebody, and again, this is one of the more aggressive techniques for filling beds, but it can be very successful because it's very lucrative for undergraduates, for members, actives, to fill beds. But in the end, you have guys that are out recruiting, they're replacing themselves. And remember, if you want your chapter to stay the same size, just the same size, not shrink, you got to recruit 25% of your total membership year in, year out. If you want your chapter to grow, it's got to be 35% or more. You got to recruit 35% of your growth chapter to grow. So that's one of the techniques that alumni can then, because they're the owners, because they're the ones that have to deal with the revenue and expenses of the house, that really has to be a plan that owners or alumni would implement. They would have to sign off on that plan, because basically you're looking at rebates for money that someone might have already paid. I don't recommend giving the discount until that person moves into the house, until they have signed their lease and they have occupied their space. Then I would use it as a rebate system, not an incentive prior to any of those things happening. So that's just one quick way that you can increase not only membership, but residency, occupancy through an incentive program. Now, there's a million ways to skin that cat. I mean, you can take that idea of an incentive, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 25%, of their lease. It could be 10%, or it could be a $500 bonus, or you come up with a lot of ways to incentivize growth and occupancy and filling bed capacity through. Matthew, I told you I'm on a call tonight, buddy. You're gonna have to leave me alone. Okay?
I'm hungry.
Okay, here. All right, go. Sorry, Kristen is not here, so she's got one of the kids and I have the other one, so I'm trying to keep him busy. Okay, so yeah, so incentives. Now you can also, sticks are the other part of it. You can basically say, if you don't fill the beds, then there's going to be some cost associated spread across the rest of the chapter, including the out-of-house guys. If you consistently aren't filling beds, or if you've given them a certain number of ramp-up years to meet some goals. You can also do a stair step. We had a lot of success doing a stair step program at Oklahoma, where we signed to a 6-year master lease, and then over that 6 years, we escalated. We started out where in other words, when we took over the property, we didn't raise rent at all in the first year. But over 6 years, we stair-stepped rent along with stair-stepping the occupancy expectation. So that's another way. But again, it's incentives. It's sticks and carrots. It's a ways to encourage people to live in the house. You can do other things like point system for room choice. You can do contests. You can give somebody a budget to fix up a room, or you can do, if they hit a certain occupancy rate, you're going to buy them an 86-inch television. I mean, you go out and drop $2,000 on a television, but if you rent $9 grand a year, that's nothing. I mean, it's not even 25%. So think about and talk to the chapter. I highly recommend it. And again, I'm talking from the alumni perspective. Talk to the chapter about what it is they want, what it is they need, things that would encourage or inspire them to grow the organization. Because really the only way to make sure you as an alum or an owner are going to have a full house is if the chapter is big enough to fill it. And again, that goes back to that 3-to-1, in my opinion. Undergraduates, actives. So kind of the same thing, sticks and carrots. What are the things that inspire guys to want to live in? What are the things that guys say reasons they don't want to live in? And then how do you attack those, or not attack, but how do you ameliorate those reasons? Very often a guy will say, well, I can go live, in an apartment down the way for $150 a month, and it costs, $800 a month to live here. Well, okay, so what do you get for the 150? Because for 800, you get everything. You get rent, utilities, water, sewer, a fraternity house, and you have to always make sure that you guys are selling or convicted in your approach with talking about that this is a premium living experience. Living in a fraternity house is a premium living experience. You're living with your brothers. You don't have RAs on every floor. You are able to be a part of the chapter. I mean, the best times I had in college were, after classes were over, 4 o'clock hanging out in guys' rooms talking, and into the evening and doing stuff and projects and float building for homecoming. And when you live out, you just aren't as connected to that experience. So don't ever sell short the idea that living in a fraternity house is a premium experience. And it's tough to put a dollar on it, and for $150 down the road, he probably isn't counting anything. No food, no utilities, very rarely are you getting a very cheap living experience off campus. I mean, it does happen, but it's pretty rare you're getting a really cheap living experience off campus if you really put apples to apples. Because more often than not, someone's trying to tell you, your apple is the same as their transmission, and they're just not. So don't be afraid to really look hard at that, those two things, and have a honest one-on-one conversation with somebody about what are the reasons you don't want to live in. Now, one of the strongest ways for you to fill your house is to have what's called mandatory living requirements. Hey, I'm on a call, okay? Oh, very nice. Okay, all right, go on. Fun night at the Fouts household. I can hear crying down the hallway. One of them got a toy and the other one didn't, and all hell's breaking loose. So what was I saying?
Mandatory live-in
Oh,
requirement.
mandatory living requirements. Yeah, to have a clause in your bylaws that require a certain number of semesters live in. I know when I was an undergraduate, we had a 4-semester live-in requirement. Now that meant is until and unless the beds were full or whatever percentage you targeted, you had to live in. It didn't mean you had a 4-semester living requirement. It meant if you had plenty of guys waiting to move in, you might only have to live in 2 semesters or 1 semester, or maybe not even at all. But if you had a small chapter that had trouble filling beds, you might have to live in for 6 semesters, 8 semesters. No one is allowed to live out until the beds are full. And then you can have a lot of different kinds of systems to determine who has to live in. Generally, there's systems that favor upperclassmen. You gain points, or you get so many points or PIN number, or whatever system you want to come up with. Sororities have all kinds of systems for stuff like this. But whatever kind of system you want to come up with that, which then gives you some sort of point value to be able to decide, okay, well, we have 20 beds and we have a 40-man chapter. I got the highest number of points. I don't want to live in anymore. So I'm going to move out. That means somebody down at the bottom then has to move in, the lowest number of points. So a mandatory living requirement. We did things like we had what we call the townie rule. You lived within 50 miles of our domicile, you didn't have to live in. We definitely always since I was an undergrad in the 80s, there was parlor fees, out-of-house fees. That has always been consistent. So think of a parlor fee or an out-of-house fee. It's a great way to generate some revenue for the chapter, for the alumni, or for the owner. But it's really rent without a bed. You're paying for electricity and water and toilet paper and paper towels and all the various things, wear and tear, maintenance, repairs, taxes. Everything that goes, it's really a usage fee for that facility. Yeah, I think Michigan State's there actually. Sean, I don't know if Sean can back me up. They just took like 38 pledges, but we only have 16 beds, or we're in the middle of a renovation. When the renovation is complete, we'll only have 16 beds. And I don't know, Sean, maybe you can chime in on the chat. You guys are going to be pushing 80 guys after this semester. So certainly 3 times. Rose Holman, I don't know how many beds they got. I'm sorry, Sean, go ahead.
It's going to be close. If it's
yeah, they're pushing hard to be the biggest chapter in the country. Rose is, I can't remember how many beds they have. They used to have like 60, but I think they're down to all singles. So if they're all singles, it's more like 25 or 30, and they consistently are a 70, 80, 90-man chapter. Michigan has been there before. They're not right now. We only have 14 beds at Michigan Tech, so they only need 45 guys to be 3-1. So South Dakota Mines, I can't remember, Tom might be able to tell me, one of the chapters, South Dakota Mines or Missouri Mines, is always a fairly big chapter, and their house isn't all that big. So it is possible. It does happen. So thank you, Eric, for that question. It does happen. It's a little rare in Triangle, but if you're just going to have a house that even has 10 beds and you're always going to be a 15-man chapter, that is a very scary situation, in my opinion. So you do the numbers however you want to look at them, but if you're not at least 2-1 and pushing towards 3-1, every year you're signing, every semester is a little scary, in my opinion. So any questions about, I want to make sure I get to all the topics. Any questions about filling chapter facilities? That was just a quick snapshot. The way I always say is take the stuff I say and then figure out a way to tailor it to your situation. You don't have to do exactly what I just suggested, but find a way to take pieces out of what I've said and maybe see if they can work in your situation. Questions about that, about filling chapter facilities at all? If not, I'll move on. You can always save them for the end, but. Okay, winter weather prep. Winter weather prep is really about, do you have the supplies you need to get through? Do you have a shovel? If you clean your own sidewalks, your own porches, you want to make sure think about safety. 90%, and Tom, check me if I got this wrong. Oh, I'm sorry. What if the students expect more than a premium experience because they show that the 3,000 month apartment offers, and yet still compared to the guy who can get a place for 400 a month? Somehow the mob mentality just. That's a long question. If T-bone steak dinners, no roommate, free parking, costs less than the guy bunking in a duplex that you must live in X years never works. Well, I think it's all about a culture. You know, a lot of this is about if you have guys that are really just, they're never going to live in, they don't have any interest in living in, I'd much rather do this over here. You might ask, are these guys really members of the organization? Because having a chapter facility in recruitment, the idea of building a culture and selling a culture that everyone that comes in understands, we are a housed chapter. Part of being a triangle at this university includes housing. And if you're not selling that culture to recruits, you're already kind of starting behind the 8 ball, because you're going to have guys that may want to join for the parties or join for the test file or join for the, I don't know, the cachet of being a triangle at a certain place. But if they're not really in on all the things it means to be a triangle, they're not really in at all, in my opinion. Guys that don't want to support a chapter facility and never plan to live in, I just don't think they're part of, I don't think they're part of the culture of a house facility, house chapter. Yeah, Eric, I know your situation quite well. I think you're in a situation where you're struggling. You got to have, you need a bit of a reboot. I think there needs to be a bit of a shakeup there, and I'm happy to talk with you offline about it more. But you and I talked about this when I was out there 4 or 5 years ago. I just think that your particular situation is a little unique, and there's some drastic kind of culture change that are needed there, and you're going to need a plan to do that. Anyway, like I said, I want to get to the other things in here, and I'm happy to talk to you, Eric, offline anytime. As you know, we spent an entire day together once, so I'm happy to chat. With winter weather protection, again, make sure you have the stuff, the safety. If you have to clean your own sidewalks, that has to be done every time there's ice or snow. 90% of our liability expenses come from non-members, people walking up our sidewalks, people visiting our facilities, people that are not members who, for whatever reason, get entangled in some sort of liability issue on our premises, at our facility, at our programs, at our events, whatever they might be. Non-members are cost us money. So we have to make sure our facilities are clean, safe, usable in any kind of weather. So that's just coming in from the street. So from the street, is my facility approachable and usable in a safe manner? Can I get people from the public thoroughfare into my private thoroughfare safely? Once they're inside, are the facilities they need to access, cold or rain or ice weather, are they set up in a way that people can get from the front door to wherever they need to go? Do we have mats? Do we have a way to make sure we're getting water cleaned up? Do we have a sign that says, slippery when wet or something like that? Is there a public restroom where they can get to without crossing a tile floor? Tile can be especially scary in winter situations with wet shoes and ice and those various things. We also want to make sure we have an area for people to knock the salt off their shoes, because that salt can be very hard on our flooring. Certainly it's tough on carpet, but it's terrible on hardwood. It's not as bad on tile, but it's just really rough on hardwood. Not just the crunching and the scratching, but just the chemicals that are in a lot of ice solvents are really bad for hardwood. And then what are we doing to make sure we don't have any losses? So as it was at the Fraternal Housing Conference in Memphis, and this continue year in, year out, the single largest claim on our insurances are water damage. And most of those come from frozen pipes. So you have pipes that are, for whatever reason, in an exterior wall, you get an especially hard freeze, 100-year freeze where it's 40 below zero. And those pipes that normally might be able to survive, 20 degrees below zero, freeze, and when they thaw, they rupture, and then when they thaw, they leak. I know that Michigan a few years back had something on the order of a $60,000 or $70,000 loss from frozen pipes. Sprinkler systems. The keys here are make sure that if and when the house is vacated for a break or holidays or for whatever reason, we want to make sure we're keeping the interior temperature at a certain level so the pipes don't freeze. That's generally going to be in the high 50s to low 60s, and as well as opening cabinets. So if we have any piping that is in an exterior, is attached to an exterior space, so a room that's against an exterior wall or a cabinet that sits against an exterior wall, like a kitchen sink is almost always under a window. So that's an exterior wall. you want to make sure if we're leaving for a period of time, or if you're going to have an especially cold night, even if you're not leaving, you're going to open those cabinet doors, open doors, don't leave bathroom doors shut on the exterior. Interior is really not generally going to be a problem. But, and then of course, in your unconditioned space in the attic, if you have sprinkler pipes going through there, they should be what's called a dry system if they're going to be an unconditioned space. So that's something to look into if you don't know the answer to that, if it was installed a long time ago. Or if you live in an area where you don't get hard freezes, but you have the 100-year cold snap, you're going to want to make sure you open attic stairwells. You want some heat to get into those spaces just to keep it warm enough to make sure that you're not going to get any pipe freezes. That's the key, because that's where because what happens is you leave for a break, you don't come back for 2 or 3 weeks. And by the way, one of the other things is somebody should be in your facility about every 2 to 3 days. Even when the house is closed, somebody should be walking that facility, because it's better to catch a pipe leak early than to let it go for 2 weeks and you've got a foot of water in the basement and you got $300,000 worth of damage. Anyway, but you want to make sure that you are venting or getting air into those spaces. Another interesting one is in your boiler room. I know this happened at Purdue. There's a fresh air vent in the Purdue boiler room. So we have a calendar reminder every year that as it starts to get cold, once the temperatures drop below about 35 to 38 degrees, we put a piece of styrofoam in that, because in the winter, that fresh air vent isn't as critical. And we have just a small opening instead of the large opening. We shut that down to just enough to get enough air in. And we also at times will prop the door to make sure there's enough heat in there. Because again, those pipes are in a cement space exterior, and if you have cold air, a cold air vent, you have a decent chance on a real cold snap of that room dropping low enough to freeze your pipes. And that's where Purdue had a large loss. That's what happened. That cold air vent was something they hadn't been checking, and it was left open, and it caused a freeze. Any questions in this action the ownership is supposed to? Is this action the ownership is supposed to do? I am being told to divest myself of presence on site. Other alumni don't live anywhere near it. Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons we talk about management companies. You know, you have people that can keep an eye on the place. You have, I mean, that's certainly our policy. Again, Eric, you're in a bit of a special situation, which I'd be happy to talk to you about offline. But regardless, and if the house is vacant, I don't know that there would be any conflict with walking the house to make sure nothing's broken, nothing's damaged, no vandal, no burglaries. I also highly recommend, burglary systems, not just fire and smoke and sprinkler, but a burglar alarm. If you're going to be gone, if the house is going to be vacant for, even up to 2 to 3 days during a break in the summer, if your house is closed in the summer, a burglar alarm is a nice thing to have as well. More often than not, it's our own members breaking into the house that set it off because they forgot something or they want something or they don't go through the proper channels to gain access. So really, winter weather preparation is just about thinking about how do I get from the public thoroughfare into the house, and then once inside the house, how do I make sure that I don't have a loss based on frozen pipes, on open windows, on bad. Another one thing is, if you have an old drafty house, there's some great products out there for sealing up your windows in the winter. Some plastic, you put them up around. I grew up on a farm. We used to put plastic around the windows and use a hair dryer to tighten it up. I mean, I don't know if they're still doing that kind of thing nowadays, but there are a lot of ways to airproof your house in the winter. And then lease best practices. So I've talked a little bit about leases, and the main thing I would say is if you're an owner, you want to have separation, meaning in our case, if we have a facility we own, or if we have a facility we're just managing, we would have the alumni do this. But really what you want is you want the ownership leasing the facility to the local organization. So I'll use Michigan State, Sean. I'm using Michigan State as an example. So the TBHC owns an LLC. We're the single member of a single member LLC. called Triangle MSU House LLC. Triangle MSU House LLC owns the house at Michigan State. All right. Triangle House LLC leases the building on an annual basis or a 9-month basis, really annual, to the Michigan State chapter. And that's both undergrads and alumni. In a lot of places, there's no delineation, members are members. So we lease that facility to the organization, not a person, not even really leadership. We lease it to an organization. Then the organization then has individual leases with the members. And then as part of that, as the management company, there's a clause in the lease that says the management company will then manage that process, meaning the chapter, the facilities leased to the chapter, the facilities leased to the chapter, and the chapter has a lease with, like Michigan State Triangle has a lease with Sean Powers, for example. But TBHC then will do the accounting, pay all the bills, and we will collect Sean's rent for the chapter. And it goes into an account that then pays all the things I just talked about: repairs, maintenance, CapEx, utilities, all that various stuff. But what that does for you as an owner is it creates some separation between the individuals. Remember, most of our liability rests with individuals. It's why they pay liability insurance. It's why there's all kinds of insurance protection for them, because most of that liability rests with individuals. And then the facility is rented to the individual. Then the facility is rented from the parent organization, be it alumni or be it one of TBHC's LLCs. And that, again, creates a little bit of liability shielding to some extent. It's not perfect. I mean, if there's a lawsuit, they sue everybody, all the way up to and including Lloyd's of London, our underwriter. But it does help in terms of if you have to go to court, you have some ability to separate some of those things out and maybe get dismissed. And again, we're very lucky in Triangle, knock on wood. Triangle doesn't have a lot of liability claims. You guys do a fantastic job, both alumni and undergrads. But it is a good system, not only for managing exposure to liability, but for managing the financial comings and goings of the chapter, of the organization in terms of the facility. One thing we also do at TBHC is we are very, very intentional in separating facility expenses from organizational expenses, or facility programs from organization, meaning we don't get involved in how much your dues are or what you charge dues for, or what we do is say, okay, here's rent, and it includes everything related to the facility: property insurance, utilities, repairs, maintenance, capital, CapEx, all of it. It's all included in rent. We don't nickel and dime. It's one-stop shop. Here's what it costs each month or each semester or each year. We also have some programs that are incentivized where if you want to pay your entire 9-month rent in advance, you get a discount. If you want to pay your entire semester, you get a discount. It's not as big as the annual discount, but it's a discount. The only way you really pay what we consider full boat would be if you pay month to month. If you pay anything more than month to month, you're going to be entitled to a discount, which most parents take advantage of. We've had years where we get as much as 90% of our revenue for the entire year in September, in that first payment cycle, because parents are like, 10%? Heck yeah, sign me up. In some cases, that can be quite a bit of money. There's a few lease best practices. Again, it's 735.